Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of Reading Rule, y'all. I'm your host, Dr. Shay Parton, and today I'll be talking about and outlining some possible teaching ideas for The Gone Away Place by Christopher Barzak. Before I get to that, though, I have a request. If you enjoy these videos or podcasts, could you like, comment, subscribe, and leave a quick review of the podcast wherever you get it? I want as many rural teachers and teacher educators to know about and have access to this series and to the ideas honoring rural identities and experiences in classrooms, and access to the authors through the author talks as possible. And I can't do that without your help. Those pesky algorithms are fueled by likes, comments, subscriptions, and reviews. So if you've got a couple seconds to spare, I'd be mighty obliged if you could help me do those things to get the word out. Thanks in advance. And now, on to the content of this episode. In my most recent video, I talked about how The Gone Away Place was helping me to think about trauma and the way it's experienced and dealt with in rural communities, how individual traumas become collective traumas, and even the smallest tragedy can feel immense. That communities can come together to support one another in their healing, which is true. But there's also this common practice of silence around how people are processing trauma and loss, especially in communities founded on agriculture. The fields don't stop needing planted and animals don't stop needing care, so when would you find the time to sit with your feelings and experiences to process trauma? I've often felt like to do so feels indulgent and selfish, even though it's not, and even though it would be better for me and those around me to process the trauma and seek healing. I feel like this tension is very much present in The Gone Away Place. For example, even in Ellie's family, there are moments for collective support of others and one another, while aspects of their experiences and efforts to heal are kept hidden, especially from one another. Because we know everyone, we're more likely to know the burdens other individuals in the community are carrying, and are reticent to add to those. So we keep what we're thinking and feeling to ourselves, even though sharing our burdens would probably actually help with everyone's healing. In The Gone Away Place, Ellie, her mom and dad, as well as other members of the community, share their ghost sightings and experiences with grief and trauma with Dr. Arroyo, but they keep things from one another. Ellie tells them all she's fine when she's not, and doesn't tell them she's seeing ghosts. Her dad doesn't tell her he's seen Noah and her other friends' ghosts, and her mom doesn't talk about how she's dealing with the devastation and grief that she is seeing as a volunteer at the shelter, because she feels like she needs to be strong for Ellie. In her work on trauma-based pedagogy, Elizabeth Dutro shares the importance and power in being both witness to the trauma of others and also testifying to our own trauma as we work with our students. So one way I think we can help to disrupt the notion of silence and censoring trauma in rural classrooms is to make intentional space for it. There are so many different ways to do that, but in thinking about my own rural students and some of the trauma they went through while in my class, I have a couple of ideas of how I would go about this in my own classroom. I'm a huge proponent of arts-based pedagogies and would often integrate the arts into my instruction. One of my students' favorites was when we would finger paint. It's low risk because I had asked them to make sure it was abstract, so they didn't have to be as confident in their artistic abilities to enjoy it, and it fostered deep and sophisticated thinking even when they felt like their artistic abilities weren't as good as what they would like for them to be. So for this lesson, I'd have students select a passage of The Gone Away Place where one of the characters is or isn't dealing with their trauma. So they either explicitly are dealing with it, or they're talking about how they're hiding not dealing with it. It could be Ellie, one of her family members, or one of the ghosts. I would have also selected a passage and would tell students that they couldn't use that one to do a quick demonstration on what this could look like. Reading the passage aloud, I would make my thinking visible. demonstrating what I was noticing and how the characters were or were not processing their trauma, and how I would represent that in paint on the page. Ideally, we would have discussed the symbolism of colors, but I would talk about why I was choosing color and how and why I was putting it on the paper. Then I pass out paints. I like tempera for this kind of activity. Palettes. I used little teeny tiny like dessert paper plates for palettes when I did this activity with students. And then paper. If you don't want it to curl when it dries, sulfite paper is usually the way to go. And then I'd ask them to paint the scene that they selected. After painting their scene, I'd ask them to discuss their painting with a partner or a small group so they could think sort of metacognitively about their decisions, as well as how the characters process their trauma through acts of witnessing and testifying. The next day or the next lesson, students would then think or write about a trauma that they've experienced and then paint it just like they did the scene from the Gone Away Place. Now, I'm an oversharer by nature and would feel just fine testifying to my own trauma by reading what I wrote aloud and sharing my painting. So I'd probably do that again, just to model the process one more time, even though students had already gone through it. But I feel like when teachers testify to their own trauma in spaces like that, it sort of gives students permission to do the same and makes things a little less uncomfortable to know that someone was willing to share with you what they were going through or something that they'd experienced. It sort of gives permission for students to do the same. So I'd share my writing and my painting. I'd invite students to do the same with someone that they trusted, but let them know that they didn't have to if they didn't want to. So just like the lesson before, students would write their piece and have their piece with them to look at and read as they were painting, to process the trauma that was located in their piece, or the trauma that was illustrated in their piece. Once both paintings were dry, I'd ask them to compare and contrast their paintings and the processes. What similarities and differences are there between the way the characters in the Gone Away Place and the students themselves do or don't deal with their trauma? What can we learn about healing from that? And what can we learn about what it means to heal as a rural person in particular from that? How would it benefit us to grow in and through the way that we process trauma to continue to do something like this painting activity, or to make time to sit with the things that we're experiencing? All of those questions are good reflective questions to engage with after doing this activity. So, I feel like this is one of the longer teaching ideas videos, but I think this topic deserved the time and the detail in terms of what I would actually do with students. I'm hoping that some of y'all might use this in your classrooms, and if you do, please reach out and let me know how it goes. That's it for today. Make sure you check out Chris's author talk, which also dropped today, and tune in next week for a bonus interview with a mystery guest. Until then, thanks for stopping by. Y'all come back now, would you?